think there's a huge element for me, and I'm going to share a bit about my story, connected to dance, connected to play, connected to fun that was often suppressed in the shadows. My specific roar got knocked out of me. Actually, it got shushed literally out of me when I was a mere age of 3 years old. And there was an exposure to sexuality and femininity and gender that I should have never, ever, and I pray for anyone's daughters and yourself, Lord, that you would just cover them. You would just cover them and protect them and send your angel armies to those moments. Because it should never happen, and yet it does. Over and over and over again. So I'm going to ask for your transparency today. I've been in many arenas with lots of women, both really intimate on retreats and really big in conferences like this. And I think vulnerability and being bold enough in your roar to even just raise your hand. Perhaps it's the first time that you've ever been invited to raise your hand around such areas of silence. You know, we serve the lion and the lamb, and the enemy knows that both sides of the coin can affect us. And so he steals, kills, and destroys from the time you are very wee until this morning, perhaps, when you looked in the mirror. Perhaps last night when you came home and you thought, I could never do that. So I'm going to ask for your participation when I ask you a couple questions. If you would just raise your hand boldly. This is your first step in the roar, okay? Have you ever had your roar knocked physically out of you? Raise your hand. Have you ever had your roar, perhaps like me, shushed physically from you? I know many of you can raise your hand to this. Have you ever had your roar masked? Have you ever had your roar humiliated out of you? You see, we're not alone in this desire to be heard. And it's ultimately not you who wants to be heard or needs to be heard, but the Christ that dwells in you and his word that needs to come alive through you. And if you've never risen your hand to any of those things before, I commend you. Well done, my good and faithful servant. Because it takes our bravery, it takes our boldness, it takes our voice connected to our action for us to actually do the hard things and for people around you to feel safe and comfortable and seen and known and heard. When you looked around the room and you sensed the person next to you raising your hand, it didn't feel so scary, did it? It didn't feel so isolating, did it? I surely was alone in that moment when I was 3 years old, and I have haunting memories of it ever since it came back to me. I'd suppressed it so much that all of the cycled patterns of my life, I had no idea why or how or when or where it had manifested. Because so often we put things in the closet. We put things under the rug. And I had gotten to the point in my life, I was 29 years old. I walked into my house and the elephant under the rug was no longer something I could just ignore. I had 2 different businesses at the time. I also had 2 babies under the age of 2. I was working about 70, 80 hours a week, hustling hard, waiting for the next dollar sign to ping on my phone. I felt like I was living the American dream in lots of ways in which people would call us Barbie and Ken. They still do. It drives me nutty. Please don't do that. And we were the youngest in the neighborhood. We had a white picket fence, literally, and both entrepreneurs, and the boy first and the girl second. Barbie and Ken, right? It's terrible. And yet I felt completely void, probably like Barbie. I pulled into my driveway this particular day at the end of a long week, and I had just finished nursing my daughter. She was 9 months old at the time, and so she was barely weaned, and I couldn't wait to see her. And yet she came, she saw me, and then she turned around and went the other way towards Dada. My heart just like crumbled inside of me, but simultaneously, that void, that chasm of I really don't know what my emotions are because I had never actually faced them before. I didn't even give them hugs at that moment. I didn't even kiss my husband who was just outside talking to the neighbors, which is commonplace for Gary Hot Hubby is what I call him. And I walked inside and I thought to myself, Tamra, this is your tombstone moment. I've named it as such since, but at that moment, I just felt like the Lord was telling me, is this what it's all meant for? Is this what you're made to be? Is this how you're going to live the rest of your life? You're going to be an entrepreneur? That's on your gravestone? No. Are you worthy in this moment? Are you integral, is the word we always went back to, of being called a good mom or a good wife? Have you taken the steps to earn that? And we know that in Christ's love, we don't have to earn that understanding of being a child of God, but we do have to take note of it. We do have to open our hands and release our own idea and our own desires of our life and the things that we put together picture perfect for the outside world to see and say, God, I don't want any of that. I just want all of you. And so now my tombstone looks really different. Yeah, I'm still an entrepreneur. Yeah, I'm a mom. Yeah, I'm a wife. And I love those things. They're huge blessings from the Lord. But I'm a daughter of the King. I am a princess in his courts. And so are you. And this element of understanding and recognizing, it took a while. It took me a while to get my roar back, because what happened with that elephant under the rug, not only did we reveal it, and my husband who I was married to, I didn't even know me. I didn't even know myself. Elements of this past came rushing in. Word pictures, therapists, churches, aunties who would give me hugs in the midst of my weariness at the altar. Strangers came and filled these gaps and these chasms. And they started to give me answers to things I never knew existed, questions I had never asked before. Surely answering questions I was raising my hand for the first time to. And at the end of all of it, every face that I looked into, while amazing, while supportive, the only one that changed me was his. I stood in that very living room a couple of hours later. And this is why I am so grateful. This was a moment where the Lord reminded me I'm in every detail, every minute. There's actually a bird flying around in here right now. And this week I was sitting outside reading the word, and there was all the birds were chirping because it was so beautiful in our crazy weather that we have here. And he reminded me of the exact song that we just sang. If he will feed the sparrows, won't he feed you too? If he will dress the lilies, won't he dress you too? And so when I looked face to face with my Creator for the first time in my life, though I had been a professed Christian since I was 14 at Young Life, someone you mentioned, such an incredible organization that stewarded me, but I still had this shadow side of me. I was walking in the light, so everybody thought. I even would have a mic and praise and worship with people, and then I just felt drawn back. And I had made an excuse, or at least the enemy had, and all of the people in the dark, they kept inviting me to that table. Sandra mentioned the table. What if that table is a table that feels inviting and yet it's of the enemy? He knows the tactics. He knows the strategy. He knows what to lure you in with. And he used my exact gifts and talents in that place and what felt like flow, alignment, health, wealth. I was a personal trainer. I really cared what the outside of me looked like and that of all of my clients. I'm like, you've got this. We had something called Beauty and the Beach back in the day, and we would literally work out in the sand. It was terrible. Sand was everywhere, but it was awesome. The hardest workout ever. And then it led into, like I said, the entrepreneurial space where wealth, I thought, was just money, glitz, and glam. All wrong.